In August, enrollment in the Naval Preparatory School began in Petrograd. In it, working and peasant youth had to pass a 3-year course of general education disciplines on the program of the pre-revolutionary Real School, as well as receive basic naval training. Graduates had the right to enter the Fleet Command School without examinations. I don't remember how the news about the new educational institution reached me, but I immediately decided to try to enter it. After all, for the Command Staff School, located in the building of the former Marine Corps, my education was clearly not enough. At home approved of my intention. Party Cell and the command of the Polygon gave a recommendation. On one of the warm September days, I excitedly entered the building of the former barracks of the Guards crew on Ekaterinhovsky Prospect. In the long corridors and cubicles of the barracks, at the doors of the rooms where the medical and credentials commissions were located, one could meet Komsomol envoys from all parts of the Republic. The number of those wishing to enroll was much higher than required, and everyone, understandably, was worried would they be accepted or not. I was happy to read my name in the list of enrolled. 3 courses of the school were formed at once. According to the level of my education, I got to the first, the youngest one. And here we are, military sailors. The service began with formation training, study of regulations. Much attention was paid to political literacy. I remember what a great impression made on the cadets the decision of the All-Russian Congress of the Russian Communist Youth Union to accept patronage over the fleet. The commissar of the school told us about the solemn meeting of the Congress on October 16th, which took place in the Bolshoi Theatre, at which all members of the Presidium were in naval uniform, and representatives of the fleet were given a banner with embroidered gold words, "To the Eagles of the Revolution, sailors of the Red Military Fleet of the Republic." On November 3rd, the cadets of the Naval Preparatory School took the military oath. On the theatre square, where our course was built, the solemn voices of the young naval cadets sounded I, the son of the working people. The days filled with intense study flowed by. The baggage of knowledge was small, but we had to study a lot. I think that some of the workers and peasants, who did not have even completed primary education, could have lost their hands if it were not for the constant help and attention from the command of the school. I remember well how often came to our classes Commissar P, Kovala, well known before the Revolution diving instructor, the head of the course P, A. Kozhevnikov, formerly an officer of the Tsarist Navy, a participant in the First World War and the Civil War. They cheered up the cadets with a relaxed conversation, advice, or even just helped them to solve a difficult task. They told us about revolutionary traditions of sailors of the Russian Navy, about feats of Baltic and Black Sea sailors during the Civil War, about glorious deeds of flotillas of Red naval sailors on the Volga and Kama rivers, on the northern Dvina and Caspian Sea, on Ladoga and Onega lakes. They told not by hearsay they had a lot of combat experience, so they fostered in the cadets future commanders of the Red Fleet loyalty to the revolutionary duty, Leninist party, pride in the high rank of a military naval officer of the Soviet Republic. I remember with gratitude the teachers of the school, who did their best to prepare us for admission to the Naval School of the Workers and Peasants Red Fleet that was the name of the Command Staff School from October 1922. I and my fellow students will always remember the excellent teachers of special disciplines, Alexei Ivanovich Kolodniak, Vladimir Vladimirovich Danilov, and Anatoly Alexandrovich Rybaltovsky, Alexei Pavlovich Bilabrov, and Nikolai Georgievich Ganenfeld. Professor Vasily Vasilievich Sipovsky, corresponding member of the USSR Academy of Sciences, a well-known literary scholar and teacher, read literature magnificently. We listened with enthusiasm to bright, imaginative lectures on Russian history by Sergei Vasilievich Pritikinsky. The command managed to attract the best teachers of the city to work in the school. Our cadet life bore the stamp of that time. We had to tighten the belt from month to month for lunch and dinner. We were fed liquid soup of salted catfish with wheat and millet porridge with rancid oil. But this did not interfere with studies, numerous debates, amateur performances such as the then popular Blue Blouse and classes in clubs. After all, everyone understood that the country was still just recovering from the Civil War, after a bad harvest year, when the cards gave a small piece of bread, and even oats and cake. We were cheerful and vigorous, and in the evenings, on the obligatory walk-in formation, typing a step on the cobblestone sidewalk or wooden ends, ringingly sang the Komsomol, "We are the young guard of workers and peasants," or "We are blacksmiths, and our spirit is young." And how cheerfully, inventively, with a zest past disputations on such, for example, topics as the origin of the universe, life in the countries of capital, on the world revolution. But even this is not enough for the guys full of energy in the evenings in the smoking room. Boyle's heated arguments vividly discuss the news that bring newspapers. Smoke stands in a column, although among the active in the school there is a circle quit smoking. We smoke makorka, which is included in the rations of a naval officer. And of course we are proud of the colourful pouches presented by the chiefs. The chiefs of the school are Komsomol members of Tula. They visited us for several days, and a lot of naval hearts were conquered by pretty Tula women in red kerchiefs, which were indispensable at that time. Winter passed quickly. The spring sun was warming more and more, the ice on the Grybordov Canal, where the windows of our company's cabin looked out. Everyone was worried about how the summer practice would be held. Of course, we dreamed of the favourite since last year dinghy trips under sail, but even more about sailing on ships. The cruiser Aurora and the training ship Komsomolets, formerly Ocean, which had already entered into service after repairs, were already standing in Kronstadt. The cadets of the naval school were preparing to practice on these ships. What is there for us, military sailors preparatory? On one of May days of 1923, the school finally got the glad tidings the training ship Warrior was towed to the pier of one of the factories. On it we were to undergo practical training. Here, in the factory, Warrior, on which went to the training voyages even cadets and midshipmen of the Marine Corps, must undergo repairs, in which we will take the most active part. The school year is coming to an end. Now we go to the factory every morning in formation. At first it seems that the ship to put in order is impossible in the premises of years of dirt, rust, in the cabins and cabins is not even half of the required equipment, and that there is broken steam engine, boilers, auxiliary mechanisms have not worked for several years. Will we be able to get them working? But we do not lose our spirits and work hard from morning till evening. Vonmorov are distributed for work on the objects. Our third platoon, more often than others, gets cleaning of tanks of drinking and boiler water and into bottom space. It's not accidental at one time those who entered the school were distributed by platoons, built by rank, and in our left flank, cadets of small stature who can get through anywhere. We work in the interbottom space cells Flores, limited by the spar. We have to work lying on our backs with one hand and a candle in the other, and it is necessary to remove the garbage, thoroughly dry the metal cleaned from rust. After an hour or two of work there is almost nothing to breathe, even the candle goes out. Then we climb out on deck, or at least stick our head out of the neck to catch our breath, to take a breath of fresh air. The command of the school tries to give us a discharge after the working day, and on weekends we go on dinghies on the bay near Kanonersky Island. The blisters from heavy oars harden on our palms, and still the best rest is on the water. I will never forget how a 6-oared yawl cuts the water surface under the measured as 2A, how the evening breeze fills the sails, and in the silence you can hear the water murmuring behind the stern. I came to the school already knowing how to manage a dinghy. On one of the outings to the bay my knowledge was checked by Pavel Andreyevich Kozhevnikov. Since then I have often commanded a 6 by myself. I am sure that a sailor should develop in himself the ability to quickly orient himself in the situation and initial command skills, starting from dinghy control. Our trips were also interesting because on the way to the bay the dinghies every time passed the hulks of shipbuilding factories. It seemed that life was gone from them. Forever huge cranes and ship hulls were rusting on the slipways and at the docking walls. On the deck of the armoured cruiser Rorik, famous in the battles with the Kaiser's fleet, the flame of the gas-cutting machine was bluing the hull, was cut into pieces to be sent for remelting. Gradually Warrior acquired a dapper look of a real training ship. The rigging was already changed, auxiliary mechanisms were repaired, and the interior was tidied up. Our course moved to the ship. A few days were spent on working out the organisation. We played the combat and emergency schedules, according to which each naval officer should occupy the place assigned to him. And now tugboats took us to Kronstadt. We're going to sea. Let it be only Markizova puddle, as sailors say, a part of the Gulf of Finland, on the shores of which we grew up. What is it like, this sea? In winter the cadets dreamed of storms and boundless expanses, of testing their strength in the fight against the elements. Commissar P. Koval, who often came to the classrooms in the evenings, a calm and thorough man, brought us back to reality. "Don't hurry, boys," he said. "Everything will come, and there will be storms. There is little joy in them. Remember that the sea does not like to joke. Not without reason it is sung in its fatal expanses, many troubles are buried," he said. Koval told about the Navy service, tried to explain to us, young men, that its essence is constant labour, but without which it is impossible to overcome the hostile elements. It is better to admire the storm and read poems about it from the shore, but at sea on the ship you have to work. Then no storm is terrible, the Commissar repeated more than once. The way along the sea canal was not long. By evening Warrior was already standing in the dock. For several days we stripped off rust and barnacles from its underwater part, then we painted the sheets of steel plating clean to a shine. We worked until dinner time. In the evening, having washed and shined the copper plaques of our belts, we familiarized ourselves with Kronstadt. In the harbours of the only naval base in the Baltic at that time, at first glance there was desolation. Hulks of unfinished cruisers' hulls were rusting at the piers. Many of the ships that had once made a heroic ice crossing from Helsingfors seemed abandoned. But we saw that the chimneys of the battleships Paris Commune and Marat, being repaired at the naval plant, were smoking, that destroyers were already standing on the big Kronstadt roadstead next to the Aurora. The fleet was recovering, gaining strength. The fortress city itself, the same age as St. Petersburg, made a strong impression on us. The streets paved with cast-iron ends, Anchor Square, where only a few years ago revolutionary sailors gathered for stormy meetings, the monument to Admiral Stepan Osipovich Makarov, with the forever-remembered instruction, "Remember the war," the ancient park near Ostrogatka and Tsar Peter looking into the bay. On the plinth there is an inscription, "The defence of the fleet, and this place to keep to the last strength and life," as the most important thing. The monuments, the Anchor Square, the docks and canals clad in granite, all this was history, not a book, but a visual illustration of what we had heard and read about before. 2 weeks passed, and Trefolev anchored at the Peterhof roadstead. Strenuous training began. We went on dinghies on oars and under sail. Everyone passed a test on the ability to manage a 6-oar yawl. We were engaged in rigging works, we splashed cables, wove mats, made mops and cranes. "Don't be lazy, everything will come in handy in the economy," more than once the chief bosun told us, under the guidance of whom our training in fleet handicrafts was going on. Every day we trained in transmission and reception by means of visual communication, semaphore, signal flags, searchlight. Our physical load was thorough, but our strength was not enough. Our rations were poor, we lacked vitamins. Because of that, many cadets fell ill with chicken blindness when the sun went down. Their eyesight sharply weakened. People became helpless. Once a boat from Trefoleva went to Peterhof harbour for food. We worked until dusk. We had not yet had time to finish loading, as it was necessary to make room at the berth. The bosun ordered the 2 cadets sitting in the dinghy to step aside for a while in the middle of the harbour, and we pushed the yawl away. A few minutes later everyone was surprised to see that the dinghy was spinning on the spot. The rowers sat with their backs to each other and rowed in opposite directions. It turned out that both cadets were blind. Soon they saw a storm for the first time. At the end of August, the cadets were raised at night on the signal of the Orail to lift the boats to the ship. The wind was rapidly increasing, the wave was beating into the side, showering the lockers with splashes. It remained to lift the bark, on which there was a cadet duty officer standing at the stern. But it was not so easy to do it. The barge was rising on the wave almost vertically, and then fell into a hollow between the foamy shafts. The watchman, clutching the can, tried not to fly overboard. From Trefoleva they threw out a storm trap to lift the cadet, but the gangway was drifting in the wind. After much effort the day watchman was hoisted on deck, and almost immediately the buckboard burst. The bark disappeared in a shroud of rain. They found it the next day in Leningrad, in the coal harbour. The watchman got a good beating for not reporting about the increased excitement. But our comrade tried to argue, proving that he had the best intentions a sailor should be able to fight and overcome the sea elements. Therefore, he took the storm as an occasion to test his fortitude and even recited stormy petrel. The summer passed imperceptibly. Preparatory cadets sat at their desks again. They began to study more seriously, more persistently. Months of summer practice were not in vain. The first acquaintance with the fleet allowed us to realize that a sailor needs extensive and deep knowledge. Winter came. In the January days of 1924, a deep sorrow covered the whole country. Vladimir Lenin died. Together with the sailors of the Baltic to bid farewell to the leader, in Moscow left cadets of naval schools, including several cadets of our preparatory school. On the day of the funeral, in mournful silence, Petrograd residents marched in an endless stream to the field of victims of the revolution, columns of Red Army and Red Fleet soldiers, cadets of military and naval schools. Over the streets and squares frosty fog and smoke from the fires. From the cruel cold the body cramped, tears froze on the cheeks. All thoughts were carried away to Moscow. And here were the last minutes of farewell to my native Ilyich, minutes of mournful silence. Plants, ships, steam locomotives are humming. Artillery volleys rumble. The next day Koval came to our class. We were sitting quietly. We had no time to study. The commissar talked to the cadets for a long time. I don't remember what about. He managed to inspire in us vigor, faith in the great future of the first country building socialism. The second training practice in the summer of 1924 again took place on the Trafova. Again boat drills, signalling, studying the device and mechanisms of the ship. How we envied the cadets of the naval school and the senior course of our preparatory school, who left in June in the first for the Red Fleet long-distance overseas campaign on the cruiser Aurora and training ship Komsomolets. To think of it, to go around Scandinavia, to visit the ports of Norway and the Soviet North. In the fall, the preparatory school was disbanded. Now we studied at the preparatory course of the naval school, lived and practiced in its building on Vasilyevsky Island. Our next practice was different from the previous years. In the summer of 1925, we sailed on the training ship Komsomolets. We went to the island of Gogland, stood on the roadstead in the Luga Bay. The time was filled with studies. We were understudies on the upper watch signal, on the rudder, forward lookout, and on the lower watch in the engine and boiler rooms. It was not easy to haul coal to the insatiable huge boilers. But hardening both physical and psychological cadets received good. There is no dirty work on the ship, said to us the chief. He is also the commissar of the school, N.A. Bolotov, as cannot be dirty deck. If the ship needs work, it means good work. The thought is extremely simple, and I learned it firmly, forever. In the middle of summer, Komsomolets went to Kronstadt and joined the battleship Marat, cruiser Aurora and destroyers. On the mast of the battleship the flag of the People's Commissar for Military and Maritime Affairs. So MV Franz arrived in the Baltic. On the tank, at the Wick, there was no lack of forecasts. Everyone agreed that there would be a campaign. Our expectations were justified. A squadron of warships and a detachment of training ships went westward. At the mouth of the Gulf of Finland, Aurora and Komsomolets, on the signal of the flagman, turned on the reverse course to Kronstadt, and the squadron made a trip to the southern Baltic. Capitalist Europe saw then the revived fleet of the Soviet country. As you know, MV Franz highly appreciated the campaign of the squadron. In an article printed in the newspaper Red Star July 3, 1925, he wrote, "We are building, and will build a strong Baltic fleet. We already have the core of it. Our marching squadron is not a bad beginning." For us, cadets of the senior preparatory course, it was the first real campaign. Perhaps the reader will find this trip quite ordinary after all. Nowadays the ships of the Soviet Navy are constantly on long ocean voyages. But at that time it was an outstanding event. The country was still healing the wounds after the Civil War and foreign intervention, restoring the economy under the economic blockade of the capitalist world. How much labor had to be invested in order to repair the warships, to provide them with fuel and everything they needed. Upon returning to Kronstadt, the cabins were filled with joyful news. Aurora and Komsomolets were going on a long voyage to the shores of the Soviet polar region. The ships will visit the ports of Sweden and Norway, will sail around Scandinavia. In general, they will repeat last year's voyage, made under the command of NNAN. Bolotov. For the voyage, the ship was required to take a full supply of fuel. Soon tugboats pulled barges with coal to the board of Komsomolets. Round-the-clock emergency work began. It is difficult for sailors of our days to imagine coal-loading nowadays ships take the necessary stock of liquid fuel in a short time, and only a few people take part in this work. Another thing is coal loading. Practically the whole crew took part in it, and on the Komsomolets also the cadets. And here comes the work. Day and night cheerful music is flowing, brass band is playing on the tank. Coal is loaded by crane, carried in sacks, baskets they are loaded on the barge and delivered to the holds and coal pits by gangways. By the way, in the days of the coal strike, the advantages of not too tall cadets of our 3rd platoon were revealed. The thing is that we had to drag sacks of coal into such corners of the holds, where the guys from the right flank were making a lot of bumps on their heads. At last the loading was finished, but the deck and superstructures of the ship, which had just shone with cleanliness, are black with a thick layer of coal dust. And again we are on strike now. We wash and clean our Komsomolets from keel to keel. Preparation for sailing is completed by painting. A review is appointed. The commander of the ship, accompanied by an assistant, and the chief bosun goes around the deck and superstructures, then descends the gangway into a dinghy. The dinghy goes around the ship. The commander checks how the sides are painted. Evaluation excellent. Now it is not a shame to go with a visit to a foreign port. The long-awaited day of the beginning of the campaign is coming. The raids of Kronstadt are already behind us. Aurora and Komsomolets are heading to the southern Baltic, to the Swedish port of Gothenburg. But it is still a day's journey to the Zund Strait, which connects the Baltic and North Seas. Ships go leisurely, at a speed of something like 10 knots, and we have time to get a good look at the humpbacked island of Gotland, dividing the Gulf of Finland into almost 2 equal parts, brightly painted floating lighthouse at the beginning of the fairway to Helsinki. Teachers read to us from the logbook descriptions of coasts and lighthouses, navigational signs, cadets study maps of the areas that the ships pass. We also feel the breath of history. Former sailors of Komsomolets. Our teachers tell us about the battles of the Civil War and World War I, about the glorious deeds of the Russian Navy in the XIX and XVI centuries. I find in the ship's library A Brief History of the Russian Navy by F. Veselago, and I read with bated breath about the victories of Peter's fleet at Gangut and Gringam, at the very shores of Finland, which can be seen in the haze on the starboard side, about the attempt of the English fleet in the Crimean War to break through to St. Petersburg and the undermining of 4 ships of Admiral Dundas on Russian mines. On the campaign, I am on watch as a messenger on the bridge or a rower on duty lifeboat. I especially like to be a messenger on the bridge. You can hear a lot of interesting things. Teachers of the school navigators Nikolai Alexandrovich Sakellari and Ivan Nikolaevich Dmitriev, experienced sailors, participants of the Russian, Japanese and World War I, know so much, talk so fascinating. And the map of the Baltic, as if comes to life, begins to tell about the past. Here is the island of Odensholm. Here in 1914 the German cruiser Magdeburg perished after hitting the rocks. Russian divers examined the ship and found secret codes. Since then, the enemy's radiograms were immediately decoded by Russian intelligence. South of the island, on the Estonian coast, is the Baltic port. In 1916, German ships tried to approach it. This attempt ended with the death of 7 enemy destroyers on Russian mines. And behind the stern remained Nargan Island, on which the Whites in 1918 shot Bolshevik bolties from the captured enemy destroyers Spartacus and Avtroil. Passing it, on the Aurora and Komsomolets lowered the flag. The detachment goes to the Baltic Sea. The islands of the Moonsund archipelago remain on the port side. Ivan Dmitriev tells about how in the fall of 1917 here, under the red flag of the revolution, heroically fought with the German fleet ships of the Baltic Fleet. Life on the campaign goes measuredly, without special events. We are drawn into the ship service. We are on watch. In the evenings we clean potatoes in the galley with the whole platoon, do cleaning on the decks and in the rooms. In our free time we have no time to be bored. The cadets of the command and engineering schools, our preparatory course, who are on board the Komsomolets, rehearse a play, learn songs, and avid soccer players Misha Vies and Kostya Shilov even managed to train on the spar deck. In the meantime, the group passes the Danish island Bornholm and in a few hours pulls into the narrow Strait Zond, separating Sweden from Zealand, the largest island of Denmark. We look with interest at the beautiful, green-tiled roofed castle on the Danish shore. This is Kronborg, a prototype of Hamlet's castle. Finally, the strait is behind us. I am just on watch messenger, and I see how relieved sighs up on the bridge, N.A. Sekulari, the fairway in the strait, is complicated, navigators had to worry. We are already in the Strait Kattegat, and the ship begins to rock the wave coming from the northwest, from the North Sea. We enter Gothenburg, a major Swedish port, around noon. Artillery salute rattles, Aurora and Komsomolets are moored to the pier. On the cruiser quickly dumped parade gangway, to him dashingly approaches the already launched boat with hooks in snow-white uniforms. The command attention sounds down the gangway descends the commander of the detachment V.M. Orlov, the head and commissar of naval educational institutions, a handsome, trim sailor. The boat, blowing a storm behind the stern, goes towards the city centre. The commander of the detachment must pay a visit to the local authorities. Orlov stands at the stern, leaning on his gilded scabbard. Vladimir Mitrofanovich, we know in winter he came to our class, asked how we study, rest, who wants to enter what schools. Cadets respect Orlov. Teachers said that before the First World War he studied at St. Petersburg University, was twice arrested by the Tsarist Guard. In 1916, the former student became a midshipman. Then Ensign Orlov served on the cruiser Bogatyr. After the February Revolution, was elected to the ship's committee of the cruiser. In 1918, joined the Bolshevik Party. A few years later, in 1931, the flagman of the fleet of the first rank V.M. Orlov became the head of the maritime forces of the Republic. In the evening, one of the teachers translates Swedish newspaper reports on the arrival of Soviet ships. Leisurely correspondent describes in detail the appearance of Orlov and informs his readers that the commander of the detachment of red ships is nothing more or less than a direct descendant of Count Grigory Orlov, a favourite of Catherine the Great. The next day we receive guests. On the quay there is a long queue of people wishing to visit the ships. Swedes admire cleanliness of decks and premises, politeness of naval officers. The acquaintance is mutual. We look at the beautiful city, walk in the shady park Luseberg, have fun on its attractions. Here in the park our ship's amateur groups perform brass and string orchestras. Russian music is a constant success among Swedes. Athletes are not lagging behind. Cadets Ismail Zaidalin and Ivan Meshko show a high class of diving. The squadron team wins a soccer match against the Swedes. Swedes treat us friendly, willingly enter into conversation, although we have to explain ourselves in a strange mixture of German and English. Still we manage to understand that from Gothenburg has just left the squadron of American destroyers, whose crews for a few days of parking in the port are famous for fights and drunkenness. It is the day of farewell. The ships leave the dock and sail into Kattegat, Skagerrak, the North Sea, then the Norwegian Sea. Unset sun, long lead dark wave, on which the ship slowly climbs, black steep cliffs and crevices of fjord entrances. This is how the polar region opens to us. The detachment passes Nordkap and enters the Barents Sea. Every day and often at night we take part in ship exercises, practice visual communication. Our funny passenger, a young brown bear, presented to the crew by the Komsomol members of Arkhangelsk last year, helps us to spend our free time. Mishka takes active part in the ship's life. He runs on alarms, stands with a bowl in the queue of Bokovic to the galley window. The cook generously pours him borscht. And he also loves to fight, but he doesn't like to be defeated. When the bear is tripped and falls down on the deck, the winner hurriedly flees. At such a moment it is better not to get under the paw of the ferocious wrestler. It happens that the bear does the bear a favour. How much fun was during the man overboard exercise when the bear, seeing a life preserver flying overboard, began to diligently throw others into the water. Having rounded the Rybaki Peninsula, the detachment enters the Kola Bay. We walk along the narrow long fjord for several hours, one knee, the second, the third. The shores are deserted. Only occasionally we see blackened log houses. Now and then we overtake or diverge with small fishing boats. But here on the left side of the course there are barracks and wooden houses scattered chaotically on the hills. This is Murmansk, the northernmost ice-free port of the country. Our ships are anchored in the roadstead. The next day a tugboat is moored to the board, sent for those going ashore. We feel with pleasure the solid ground under our feet. We are surprised to see for the first time dwarf birches and aspen trees, groves of which are crowded in the hollows between the hills. The city, which emerged only during the First World War, does not yet have its own face. People live in barracks, in wagons and huts taken off the wheels. In a one-story wooden house the city council is located, the centre of Lifeport railroad station. The city is still just healing the wounds inflicted by the Civil War. Old-timers tell about how they tried to break through to the south along the railroad to Petrozavodsk, the interventionist troops. The invaders were driven out by the Red Army. But leaving, Americans and Englishmen ruined the port, took away to England warships and ships of merchant and fishing fleets. The next point of our route is Arkhangelsk. We go to the White Sea after a short stop in Murmansk, having replenished fuel and water supplies. All the time of the crossing the weather is fine. Only low fogs drifting along the water make navigators worry. Having finished the passage, the ships of the detachment are at the roadstead at the mouth of the northern Divina, near Solombala, a suburb of Arkhangelsk. Not far away, low sandy shores of Mudyog Island. Here, in a concentration camp set up by Anglo-American interventionists, Soviet people languished workers, prisoners of war. Communists were shot here. On the excursion to Arkhangelsk, we sail down the river on an old wheeled steamboat. On both banks stretch endless stacks of sawn and round timber. Next to them, at the berths, timber ships under foreign flags, standing under loading. Export of timber in those days was one of the main sources of foreign currency the country needed. We went ashore and walked along a long street stretching parallel to the river. It bears the name of Pavlin Vinogradov, who headed the North Divinsky military flotilla during the Civil War. Petrograd Bolshevik worker died in battle with the enemy. In the city everything is connected with the sea, the close Arctic. From the shore of the northern Divina, left on a Voyage carbus, and Ruxpomas, the discoverers of Novaya Zemlya and Grumant, brave navigators who in the XVII century laid the sea road to the mouths of the Oby and Lena, the ancient Mangazia. From the piers of Solombala saw off the brave navigators explorers of the Arctic seas PK, Paktusov, G.Y. Sedov and many others. By evening we return to the board of the Komsomolets and learn that tomorrow the detachment is leaving on the way back. We are glad. Admittedly, we want to go home, to our relatives. On the way from Arkhangelsk to Kronstadt we enter Bergen. The detachment enters the fjord, in the depths of which we can see high spires of Gothic churches of the ancient Hanseatic city. Aurora and Komsomolets give anchors in the roadstead, not far from the city quay. To just dumped out the gangway cruiser, immediately approaches the boat with a visit, arrived the commander of the French patrol ship. Stand on the roadstead and American destroyers that came to Gothenburg before our arrival. After a thorough check of uniforms, the discharged are taken ashore. We wander through the narrow medieval streets, admiring the lancet picks pointing upwards. But even more interesting are the meetings with ordinary Norwegians, many of whom know a few Russian words. As a rule, they are sailors who have been to Murmansk many times, or fishermen who fish off the Kola Peninsula. They pat us on the shoulder, treat us to tasty dark beer, and invite us to come to Bergen again. The silence of the clean, cosy city is now and then broken by a gang of drunken sailors from American destroyers. And our sailors, and the French and the Norwegian masters themselves, try not to notice their unworthy behaviour. But as I learned in the evening, it is not always possible. Near one of the bars, the Navy divers from Komsomolets, strong guys 1-to-1, had to fight back against the brawlers. Again, drills and classes, watches and endless cleaning, wash and paint superstructures scrub the copper. After all, the ship should enter the home port, as the chief boatswain says, in the best form. And here the dome of the Kronstadt Sea Cathedral appeared on the bow. Another hour, another, and the detachment anchors at the big Kronstadt roadstead. Now, after many years, I understand well how great was the importance of this voyage for us, young naval officers, on the Komsomolets. We not only kept watch together with the Red Fleet men, but also for the first time felt the beauty of the sea, loved the unique smell and bitter taste of splashes, the amazing and rhythmic dance of the waves. The campaign awakened in us a strong interest in the history of the Russian Navy, to the exploits of its warships and outstanding voyages of circumnavigators, explorers of the world ocean. So, we are already cadets of the first year of the Frunz Naval School. This is how it was called, after the untimely death of the chairman of the Revolutionary Military Council of the Republic, Commissar for Military and Maritime Affairs, an outstanding Bolshevik Mikhail Vassilievich Frunz. It seems that the way to the commander's arm chevrons is very long. But 3 years fly by surprisingly fast. The peaks of general education sciences, higher mathematics, physics are taken. With the help of excellent, deeply erudite teachers, much knowledge is acquired in special disciplines. We will never forget N.A. Sekulari, N.I. Dmitriev, A.P. Belobrov, B.P. Kolustin and M.N. Nikitin, who taught us navigating artillery F.F., Klokhanov and E.V., Lapidevsky navigating F.F., Klokhanov and E.V. Lyapidevsky. V. Lyapidevsky torpedo and mine weapons Y.A. Dobroktvorsky naval practice N.E.D. Karin. We will always be grateful to the laboratory assistants of the training rooms, naval petty officers of training and warships Noskov, Gologogolnikov, Lychik, Osipov, Vorobyov, Gritsuk. They patiently passed us their skills of working with technical means and weapons, taught us to repair and prepare for combat, use guns and machine guns, torpedoes and mines. The technical equipment of training rooms of those years was not distinguished by special variety. In the artillery room we were engaged in the study, disassembly and assembly of individual parts of guns, shells and charges to them, practiced in the management of artillery firing on a special device. In the offices of mine torpedo weapons there was a torpedo apparatus destroyer, lay on the tables torpedoes, on the floor stood mines model 1908, 1912 and type fish. From the trawl weapons there were common at that time trawls, Schultz and boat. Even poorer was the equipment of the navigator's office, where, except for navigators laying tools, maps and magnetic compasses, there was nothing. Practice on warships during the summer campaigns of 1926 and 1927 gave us a lot. In the 26th year I was on the battleship Murat. The cadets meticulously studied the numerous mechanisms of the huge artillery turrets of the main caliber, 120mm guns, the work of all numbers of calculations. Nowhere and never have I observed after such coherence in the actions of hundreds of people the calculations of the formidable 12-inch guns were worked out perfectly. Every day we studied the huge ship, drew in our cadet books plans of its decks and compartments, with the location of the main mechanisms and devices. I remember that at the beginning it seemed to us that it was impossible even to memorize the location of the main rooms of the Murat. But by the end of the practice the cadets were already dashing in artillery calculations. In total darkness they fought with water and fire in the compartments. The summer practice of 1927 on the cruiser Aurora was also interesting. We improved our knowledge in navigating, conducted training artillery firing. After Aurora there was a voyage on the training ship Leningrad-Sovet, known to more than one generation of Frunzians. Again, practicing navigational skills, navigating on the map, determining the place by stars and planets, the sun and the moon. YF Rawl, L.A., Polov I.G. Georgiadi were the commanders of the ships on which we practiced in our cadet years. All our life we remembered them and tried to become the same good sailors, skillful educators, people of real, genuine culture. We will not forget ship specialists, with the help of whom we studied weapons and technical means, their combat application AA, Rule GA, Verbovic K.A. Planson V. I. Gorolkin V. F. Chernyshev. That same summer we visited minesweepers and destroyers, participated in training trawling, mine laying and torpedo firing. By the fall I already had an idea of most classes of ships of the fleet, the nature of their combat missions. The winter months of training on Vasilievsky Island dragged on for a long time. But summer was coming to the fleet. It was a joy to see how every year all new and new repaired and modernized ships came into service. In May 1928, the school produced a graduation. We traveled to the fleet's ship cadets, not yet having commanding ranks. And here came the fall, We are back in Leningrad. The head of the school, Fedorovich Rawl, reads the order. We are commanders of the Red Fleet. We are warmly congratulated by Commissar Y.V. Volkov, teachers and laboratory technicians. Farewell, native school named after Mikhail Vassilievich Frunze. In November 1924, M.V. Frunze said some comrades, in connection with the lack of funds, is the idea that it is better to focus all our attention on the land army. This point of view is extremely erroneous. The Revolutionary Military Council stands firmly and unshakably on the point of view that the Navy is extremely necessary for us, that we must develop it further. We are facing the need to immediately start building new ships. The transition to the construction of a new fleet became possible only when the Komsomol members came to the fleet at the call of the party. Speaking at the RLKSM conference on June 17, 1925, M.V. Frunze assessed the contribution of Lenin's Komsomol to the strengthening of the country's sea power as follows: we now have a good, strong armed fist, which can be a reliable bulwark of the Soviet Union. And this, I repeat, we owe you to a large extent. That we owe those tens of thousands of members of the Union who were injected by you into the naval contingents and who managed to create a moral and material breakthrough there. In the year of our graduation from the school in the Baltic Fleet was already 3 battleships, 2 cruisers, 10 destroyers, 9 submarines and other ships. In the Black Sea, a new light cruiser Chervona Ukraina came into service, joining the previously restored cruiser Komintern, destroyers and submarines. The restoration of the fleet is finished. The program of military shipbuilding adopted in 1926 by the Council of Labour and Defence, designed for 6 years, is already being implemented. It provides for the construction of 12 submarines, 36 torpedo boats, 18 patrol ships, as well as major repairs of battleships, completion of 2 cruisers, and several destroyers. We became commanders. Saying goodbye to the school, I went to the museum, created by the efforts of its pupils. During the whole XIX century, the memorable gifts of circumnavigators, explorers of Russian America and the Arctic, participants of battles with Russia's enemies, combat officers, flocked here. I spent many hours here, looking at beautifully made models of ships of the Russian sailing and armoured fleet, portraits of admirals, heroes of long-ago sea battles. Thanks to the oldest teacher Leonid Alexandrovich Grossman, the permanent keeper of the museum of the school, who did so much to save and increase its funds. In the corridor, on the walls of which there are carved wooden figures, which once decorated the prows of sailing ships, we go out together with Konstantin Shilov, our closest friend during all the years of study. We are a little sad for 4 years the walls of the ancient building on the Lieutenant Schmidt embankment have become dear to us. After a month's vacation, the personnel department of the Baltic Fleet sends the graduates to the crew. The assignments to the ships have not come yet. We start training conscripts, the young replenishment of the Red Fleet. We do a lot of general military training. Well, we are not the first. Every year graduates of the Frunze School start their commanding service in this way. Of course, everyone wants to go to the ships, to the sea, as soon as possible. But soon I am convinced that time passes not without benefit. I learn to command, well assimilated not only the subtleties of formation training, but also the tactics of small arms units. It turns out that to command a platoon in defence and offensive, skillfully use small arms in combat, is not easy. And knowledge of fighting on land is clearly not enough, although the school gave the initial skills of general military training, and in the second year we further participated in exercises in the areas of Ropsha and Pulkova. Fortunately, we have someone to learn from. All junior commanders graduated from the famous Oranienbaum School of Combat Petty Officers, which existed in the pre-revolutionary years. In the First World War, its graduates, non-commissioned officers, showed themselves well in the battles near Riga against the Kaiser's troops, fought on the fronts of the Civil War with the White Guards and interventionists. In the 1920s, the school gave the Red Fleet more than 100 well-trained in shooting and formation training junior commanders. Petukov, my assistant platoon commander, not the first time prepares recruits, and with his help I soon master all the wisdom, become a real builder. My dapper chrome boots in a month have to be replaced by more durable Yalovi, and I am convinced what a great thing to be able to properly wind up the shoelaces. He who does not know how to handle portkanoks is not a soldier, says my platoon commander. The training of young Red Fleet men ends with a 3-day exercise near Pulkovo. The Baltic crew practices and passes the tasks on the actions of the rifle regiment in defence and offensive. It's December, the ground is frozen, but I, together with my men, dig full-profile trenches and equip cells for machine guns. We defend ourselves from the advancing Blues, and then go on the offensive and crush the enemy in the very places where our fathers and older brothers beat Yudenik only about 10 years ago. The events are not so old. Among the commanders and the crew there are their participants. Therefore, the exercises are intense, the young fighters act without any discount for peaceful days. Could we have thought then that years later, in the 41st, on these same borders, the guns removed from the Aurora will hit the enemy, and the Marine infantry and army units with daring attacks will stop, throw back the Hitlerites rushing to Leningrad, make them burrow into the ground? Probably more than one Baltic, more than one Black Sea sailor in those days kindly remembered their strict teachers from the Navy crew knowledge of shooting. Ability to act on land came in handy. And many graduates of the Iranian bomb school became good all-army commanders. So, during the Great Patriotic War, commanded compounds Kombrigade D. Dubina, Colonel V.N.A. Karpetsky. Of course, all this time we graduates of the Frunze School were impatiently waiting for the order of the head of the naval forces of the Republic R.A. Muklevich. Talks about what fleet, what ship, what specialty we would have to serve in did not stop for a single day. I was sure that I would get an appointment as an artilleryman on a battleship, because after graduation I had been trained on the Marat as an assistant commander of the main caliber turret. Even as a child, at the naval proving ground, I looked with admiration at the formidable guns of large caliber. The complex machinery of the battleship's 12-inch turrets each with 3 long-range guns captivated me. I loved to watch how, obedient to clever mechanisms, huge shells and charges crawl from the depths of the artillery cellar, how obediently the locks open, letting them into the mouth of the breech. Yes, in those years the battleship's main caliber turret was the centre of everything new, the last word of naval technology. It is clear that I wanted to serve on huge ships, which in those years constituted the combat core of all the fleets of the world, and was pleased with the conclusion in my attestation: to be appointed assistant turret commander on a battleship. That's why the appointment to torpedo boats was a complete surprise for me. What torpedo boats are, and how to serve on them, I imagined rather vaguely. In one of the rooms of the crew in the fall of 1928 lived teams of 2 torpedo boats under construction at the factory, and we asked with interest their commanders, dressed in leather suits and flight helmets. Torpedo boats will still show themselves, they said. Power, speed, manoeuvre, we have it all. But it did not occur to me at that time that soon I would have to become a gunboatman, to forget about big artillery ships forever. Together with me, my classmates I, Kruglov, V.M. Narikov, S.D. Solukin, as well as F.S. Okyabersky, who graduated from the parallel classes of the command staff of the school, became torpedo boat commanders. From the headquarters of the Baltic Fleet, located then in Kronstadt, in the building of the former Marine Assembly, we came out somewhat confused, had to master completely unfamiliar ships, new weapons that appeared in the fleets of maritime powers only by the end of the First World War. But anyway, for a military man, an order is an order. On the ice we reached Kronstadt on foot, a small artificial fort island built under Peter the Great to the south of Kronstadt. Here was the base of the 1st Baltic Torpedo Boat Detachment, whose commander was V.F. Chernyshev. During the First World War, Kronstadt served as the base of the mine detachment. From that time, near the lighthouse in the locality it is called Lower Kronstadtskogo Dvora, there is a small house, which housed the headquarters of the detachment, near built a hangar for boats. We were received by V.F. Chernyshev, familiar to me from my cadet years on Komsomolets and Marat, on which he served as a senior navigator. We also got acquainted with the commissar of the squadron A.F., Berilov. We were lucky Vice-Volod Feodosievich Chernyshev, son of the famous academician metallurgist F. Chernyshev, was a man of great culture, a real intellectual. During the First World War, after graduating from midshipman classes, he commanded a motorized minesweeper and gained considerable combat experience. From the very first days of service classes began. They were conducted by the commanders from the small squadron headquarters Minor A, K. Planson, Mechanic V, I, Gorelkin and Vice-Volod Feodosievich Chernyshev himself, under their guidance and with the help of N.E. Cavan and I. A. Novikov, commanders of the 2 torpedo boats available in the detachment we studied the material part. Training aid. Was nearby, just entered the fleet of the first domestic-built boats of HA-4 type, put in the boathouse, until spring. The history of creation of these boats is as follows. Starting from 1923, a group of young specialists of Tsaji, under the leadership of A.N. Tupolev, developed the project of torpedo boat of coastal action and 3. This boat, named Pavinets, was tested in the summer of 1927. Firstborn had one torpedo caliber of 450 mm and developed a speed of up to 54 knots. Later A.N. Tupolev created another, somewhat larger boat Ant 4, and then, according to his project in 1928, began serial construction of torpedo boats of the HA-4 type. The crews of the boats consisted of well-trained petty officers, motorists and bosuns. I.A. Volkov V, Alexeyev V, Luchinin A, Aladin A, Bogdanov B, Ivanov and L. Valchuk, without sparing any time, literally tended the mechanisms and hulls of their boats. Kavin and Novikov, as well as some petty officers, already had sailing experience. They acquired it on the Black Sea, where they delivered from the Caspian Sea, seized in Enzell from the British interventionists, torpedo boat type Thornycroft. True, these Thornycrofts had a displacement of only 5 tons and had very poor seaworthiness. Nevertheless, created in the Black Sea Fleet Div Storkat, a division of patrol and torpedo boats, became a training base for training the first boatmen. Of course, both I and other newly appointed commanders tried to maximize the knowledge of petty officers, especially motor officers, studying with their help the engines and the device of boats. We occasionally went to our home school in Leningrad to train under the guidance of A.K. Planson and teacher O. Osipov to train on the torpedo firing device. In the library of the school I read everything I could about torpedo boats and their predecessors, mine boats. In the detailed work of F.F. Rangel, dedicated to Admiral S.O. Makarov, in the book published back in the last century, V. Chubinskarago, on the participation of sailors in the war with Turkey in 187778. Described in detail the courageous actions of mine boats that sank or damaged several ships with the use of torpedoes, self-propelled mines, Whitehead, as they were called at the time. Mine boats also acted well in the Russo-Japanese War. With torpedoes, they destroyed Japanese destroyers trying to break into the harbour of Port Arthur, and in many issues of the favourite Naval Commander's Magazine Marine Collection, described the actions of British, German and Italian torpedo boats during the First World War. With special attention I studied the use of torpedo boats in Zeebrugskoy operation of the British Navy in 1918, the organisation of strikes on the ships of the Austro-Hungarian fleet in the Adriatic. I learned that the British, it turns out, even in the course of the war, realised the significant shortcomings of 5-ton Thornycroftovi with one motor and moved to the construction of larger, the so-called 55-foot boats with 2 motors, armed with 2 torpedoes. With a displacement of about 10 to 12 tons, they had a speed of about 40 knots. In the attack on the ships of the Red Fleet in 1919 participated boats of this type. On the actions of British boats against our fleet in the Baltic in the Civil War, in one of the winter evenings we once gave a lecture, with a detailed analysis on the map, the commander of the detachment. On Churchill's personal instructions, 2 5-ton torpedo boats were smuggled to Terioki in June 1919. They were at the disposal of British intelligence. They delivered spies to Petrograd, ferried them back to Finland, acted on the instructions of the intelligence service agent, the famous Paul Dukes. The shallow draft allowed Thornycrofts to pass north of the Kronstadt forts and remain undetected for a long time. On June 13th, a counter-revolutionary mutiny began at the forts Krasnaya Gorka and Grey Horse, prepared by agents of British intelligence and White Guards. Battleships Petropavlovsk and Andrei Pavlosvany and battleship cruiser Oleg left Kronstadt to bombard the mutineers. On June 16th, unnoticed guard English boat released a torpedo from a distance of 2.5-3 cables and sank the cruiser, which was near the lighthouse Tolbukin. The destroyers guarding the Oleg opened fire too late, and the British returned safely to Terioki. In the following months, torpedo boats of the enemy repeatedly tried to attack the ships of the Red Fleet at sea, but met by artillery fire, did not succeed. However, the British Admiralty did not give up its intention to destroy the ships of the Baltic Fleet. Since all attempts to break through to Kronstadt ended in failure and significant losses, the interventionists decided to transfer a division of torpedo boats to the Gulf of Finland. On July 30th, 7 55-foot Tornicrofts came to the port of Bjork. These boats and one of the earlier 5-ton boats attacked our ships in Kronstadt on August 18th. Chernyshев showed us on the map the path of the British from Bjork to Kotlin, told about the skillful actions of the commander of the duty destroyer Gabriel, which successfully evaded the torpedo fired by the enemy and sank 3 torpedo boats by artillery fire. Still, the enemy managed to torpedo the outdated battleship Andrei Povozvany and submarine base Memory of Azov, but the main task to sink the battleship Petropavlovsk and cruiser Rurik was not accomplished, despite the good interaction between torpedo boats and the British aircraft, which simultaneously with the torpedo attack bombed the harbours of Kronstadt. The lecture caused a lot of debate among young commanders about the tactics and combat capabilities of torpedo boats, ways of their development. All this was of great benefit in search of arguments to support this, or that point of view. We had to go through extensive literature on combat operations at sea in the First World War. Thus we collected numerous materials on the development of combat boats in foreign fleets in the post-war period. Even before the ice broke up on the bay, we studied the first domestic torpedo boats down to the cogs. We could be proud of our small but formidable warships. Let the displacement of the Esh-4 be only 10 tons, but the speed 47 knots, and armament 2 torpedoes of 450mm caliber. By spring I already had my own crew, 5 petty officers and Red Fleet men. Over the winter we prepared ourselves to accept the ships from the shipyard with knowledge. And now, with the beginning of navigation, I was taking the crew to Leningrad. We had to take the boat and use it for factory and state tests. Our boat, No. 31, is of Shesh-4 type, designed by A.N. Tupolev. The hull is made of duralumin, a new material just mastered by the Soviet industry. 2 powerful aircraft engines, Wright Typhoon, provide high speed. The first Soviet torpedo boats were built by people from whom you can learn a lot. Vladimir Vasilievich Razumov, the head of the Komsomol and Youth Workshop specially created for the construction of torpedo boats, is an exceptionally erudite and versatile engineer who knows his business very well. While supervising the construction of the boats, he also actively worked on the design of missiles, headed the initiative group of Leningrad, and a little later led the design and construction of the first Soviet airships of rigid construction. I also remembered other builders of Tupolev boats, engineers A.N. Kalmakov V.I., Izakov V.M. Berlikov, ship assembly workers GNN, Borovsky, A.A. Karpatin N.K., Belokon, B.A. Belokon, B.A., Artsabashev, motorists A. Aladin P. Saichev and N. Gromov. Red Fleet crews worked together with them both in preparation for outings and at sea. It helped to learn all tricks and vagaries of mechanisms. Acceptance tests of the boats were conducted by the Commission, the chairman of which was A.K. Vekman, former commander of the Baltic Fleet, and the construction was supervised by the staff of the then-existing Komsomolets, Alexeyev, V.D., Zaloga, M.N. Chernetsky, and the control master D.D. Solukin, brother of Sergei Solukin, my classmate, future admiral. The commander of the squadron V.F., Chernyshев, also took part in the tests. Of course, not everyone went out to sea for sea trials after all. Even the crew was cramped on the boat, and there were no cabins or quarters on the Eshi-4. As a whole, the sea trials were normal, but there were some adventures. I remember one of the days of testing for full running mode, when the boat was running on the channel between the Sea Canal and the small Kronstadt roadstead. 2 650 horsepower engines roared deafeningly at 2200 RPM. We almost flew over the smooth surface of the water, the stroke of 48 knots, 90 kilometers per hour. Suddenly a tongue of flame came out of the gasoline compartment at the stern afire. Aviation gasoline is no joke. If you hesitate, there is a possible explosion. A.D. Raspopov, a mechanic of our squadron, rushed into the compartment with a fire extinguisher in his hands. Oiled rags and oil were burning. Fire extinguishers could not knock out the flames, so we used Cape bushlats, sand taken on the boat instead of torpedoes as ballast. Still, it was possible to prevent the explosion of gasoline and put out the fire. We started to find out the cause of the fire and found out that the fire was caused by strong heating of the bearings of the propeller shafts. We were towed to Kronstadt by a passing boat which was nearby. Everything ended safely, but Razumov only shook his head, looking at hopelessly spoiled shaft necks. Well, why did they pour sand? He said angrily. Now new shafts must be sharpened. You, Vladimir Vasilievich, speak directly like the master to the worker in the famous fable, "Why did you spoil the bear's skin?" grinned engineer VVV, Isakov, who was also with us at the exit this time. If we had delayed, we could have ruined the boat and ourselves, added mechanic A.D. Raspofov. Finally, all the tests came to an end. For the first time, I took the boat out to sea and independently brought it to the bucket of the Kronstadt for the first time independently, without the help of the workers of the plant, acted at the mechanisms of the engine foreman V. Bobrov, his subordinates Guliam, Tyupenko and Kolesnichenko. Bosman L. Loshkarev, after the approach to the berth, immediately starts cleaning, although the boat is already shining clean. But I do not hinder, I understand, that the petty officer is in love with his ship and cannot see even the slightest spot on the paint. Lucky with the crew, I mentally summarize the work done. The guys are competent, excellent specialists, experienced, all have already served on destroyers or submarines for 2 or 3 years. We will do well. The next day it was necessary to take gasoline. Fuel pier nearby, you can pull to it without starting the engines, on the mooring ends. But I decide otherwise. I take a motorist on the boat, and without uncovering the deckhouse, I start manoeuvring under one engine. I give a forward stroke, the motor worked at low speeds. The berth is already close. I put the telegraph on stop, the motor continues to work. I give small, then medium back, the motorist for some reason does not fulfill the command. And now my 31st hits the stern of one of the boats with its nose. The cause of the incident is quickly found out. A strong jet of oil suddenly burst out of the pump and knocked down the motorist. The mechanic found a fistula in the pump casing. But whatever the reason, my boat got a hole in the bow. I had to go to the factory to repair the hull and replace the pump. This incident, of course, taught me a lot. I never relied on Russian avars again, having learned once and for all that such accidents are created by the commander's negligence, neglect of the requirements of the charter. The repair was done quickly, a new pump was put on the boat. That's how they are, the Americans. V. Bobrov was angry. They meshed something and covered it with paint. The defect was sent to us by the famous firm Curtis Wright. To Kronstadt 31st return, not alone, together with us came the boat 141. Now the squadron has 4 new Soviet-built boats and 2 delivered from the Black Sea Tornycrofts. We are already a force. The F. Chernyshev met us with joy and immediately ordered us to get ready to go to sea. Well, sunshine, it's wonderful that we came. Now, not from ship to ball, but from ship to ball tonight we'll take part in the exercise. We'll attack battleships. They are standing on the roadstead, behind the booms, guarded by forts and ship's watch. We were to operate at night, and in an area with many navigational hazards. Let's face it, the decision of the Fleet Command to include in the number of participants of the exercise just arrived from the factory fast boats was bold, even risky, and quite in keeping with the spirit of the time. With the sunset, 4 boats left the Kronstadt. Having turned off the engines, we lay down in a drift on the traverse of the lighthouse Stursudden, that on the Finnish coast of the bay. It is getting dark. The boats are so close to each other that we can occasionally talk to each other. Night falls, and the squadron begins to move. Kronstadt is darkened, no lights on the roadstead and forts. Attack boats are waiting for now and then on the surface of the bay, fumble beams of searchlights from Krasnaya Gorka. We are sailing at an average speed of 32 to 36 knots, but now the noise of powerful engines is heard on Krasnaya Gorka. Searchlights are looking for us. But as soon as the boat gets into the beam of light, we immediately stop running. The searchlights, calculating that the target is rushing at high speed, lead the beam further and therefore lose it at once. We skip past the patrol ship. It is the patrol ship Anchor. We pass the hulk of the half-sunken Oleg, the patrol ship Pioneer, standing at the very booms from it. We have time to be illuminated by the searchlight. The bow gun rumbles. But it's too late at full speed 50 knots. We rush through the boom gate to the big Kronstadt roadstead, and the foamy storm splashes the patrolman. As it turned out the next day, the ships did not have time to repel the swift attack. The intermediaries decided so. It was said that just at the moment of our breakthrough to the roadstead, the commander of the battleship V. Samoylov gathered on the left cut of his unit commanders and, without hurrying, explained to them the system of guarding the ship at the roadstead. Those present were quite confused when almost at the very side lit phosphorus signal round it was dropped from a torpedo boat, indicating a torpedo strike. We can say that at the exercise in the fall of 1929, torpedo boats of the Red Fleet for the first time demonstrated their power, their combat capabilities. And for us, the first joint campaign and attack turned out to be also a test of tactical methods developed in winter on Kronstadt. The torpedo boat detachment became an indispensable participant of all Baltic Fleet exercises. It was now considered as an important part of the strike force. Until the bay did not stand ice, we went out every now and then in training attacks on the connections of surface ships, battleships and destroyers, cruisers and transports on the passage by sea, and at anchorages on the roadsteads. Due to frequent outings, night and day attacks grew the skill of boat commanders, all crew members. Experience, however, was not easy. Once the squadron returned from a campaign and anchored at the Krasnogorsk roadstead, Fleet headquarters set the task with the onset of darkness to attack the ships, marking torpedo salvos with flares. Vsevolod Feodosievich decided to strike the enemy from 3 directions from the west, north and east. My 31st was part of the western group and went in the keel of the boat, on which was the commander of the squadron. In order to strike, our group needed to describe a huge arc, bypassing the raid from the north. The roar of powerful engines there were no mufflers yet raised the alarm on the ships, and the searchlights were turned on at the forts. Minutes more, and the enemy will detect us. Having assessed the situation, Chernyshev decided not to waste time and take his group to attack from the north. The signal, rearrangement in the front line, and giving full speed, we rush at the enemy. As a result, when leaving the attack, we were on the battle course of the northern group. At full throttle, the boats were passing on opposite courses so close that they were showering each other with cascades of water. And it was night, and at that time radar had not been invented yet. Another memorable episode. Late in the fall, in bad weather, banging their bottoms against the waves, the boats went out to sea to attack the enemy on a remote roadstead. The first staged the transition to a maneuvering base. Soon on the lake, not far from our parking lot, sits seaplane. It is an aerial reconnaissance. Pilot observer shows the commanders on the map disposition of ship's enemy in one of the Lips 10 destroyers are anchored in 2 lines, between them a corridor width of about a mile. Chernyshev announces his decision: the detachment will break into this corridor and torpedo the ships of the enemy from a distance of 2 to 3 cables. With the onset of darkness, we start moving. We bypass a cape protruding into the sea, pass a bank with shallow depths and, giving full speed, rush to the attack. A complete success. On the destroyers missed our approach, opened fire late. And it is dangerous to fire you can hit in their ships, with which torpedo boats. We're coming back in a tight column. My 31st is throwing great, the excitement is getting stronger. Finally we come to our base, but then it turns out that one boat is missing. One of the commanders and his bosun recalls that they seem to have been hit by the bow, but it was not given importance. Could it be that the missing boat was hit by a collision? It is impossible to go out to sea to search, it is stormy. Operational duty fleet transmits that the command decided to send the ship to search as soon as dawn. Fortunately, in the morning comes the glad tidings: the boat was found, and some transport is towing it to Kronstadt. And what happened to it was what we expected. It got a hole in the stern compartment. It was rammed on a turn by a wingman. The crew spent the whole night fixing the hole and pumping out water, and managed to keep their boat afloat. In these difficult hours, all people behaved courageously. Alexeyev, the foreman of the motor crew, and Alyoshin, the bosun, were especially distinguished. During the last two exercises of the closing campaign of 1929, the squadron attacked the squadron already on the passage by sea. We leave from Ust-Luga to strike from the west. The enemy is coming from the Kotlin side. With the onset of darkness, the weather is noticeably deteriorating. The wave is hitting the hull more and more fiercely. But here in the east I notice dark silhouettes of a cruiser and a destroyer. This is the advanced detachment of the connection. Chernyshev's signals do as I do and evades the advanced forces of the enemy. It seems that we have not been detected. Minutes more, and boats, divided into two groups, attacking battleships from the forward bow angles. Rockets fly up, indicating torpedo salvo, and we, having reorganized in the keel column, go to the east, to the base. A large oncoming wave makes us reduce the stroke, but the open deckhouse still floods. From time to time we pass through charges of wet snow. The boatswain and I are not wearing a dry thread. An hour or two passes, and it becomes a little easier. Wet woolen underwear, like a compress, keeps the body heat. The wave throws the boat so much that the compass card rotates like a merry-go-round. It is impossible to take off the course. The shores are not visible. It is impossible to determine by lighthouses or other coastal landmarks. The boat of the squadron commander changes course several times, probably. Chernyshov is not sure of the calculated place, afraid to lead the squadron on the bank or rocks. Finally manages to locate the lighthouse Shepelevsky. Boats increase the stroke. The base is close. We are moored with almost empty gas tanks. A little more, and we would have been left without a way to the sea. The Kronstadt is plunged into darkness as a pity. Our homegrown power station is out of order. The base commander of the detachment, PA, Kuznetsov, is trying to illuminate the edge of the booms with a battery lantern. Boats one after another approach the pier. The last on the wall appears stocky figure of the squadron commander. Water streams down from his raglan. In his hand a map, crumpled, wet. In a few minutes all the commanders in the wardroom are silently warming themselves with strong tea. Then, interrupting each other, they remember the difficult transition. Yes, my darlings, such a thing has never happened in my navigating or commanding practice. Vsevolod Feodosievich suddenly bursts into loud and, as always, infectious laughter. This is not a battleship deckhouse. It is always warm and dry there. And here was the last exercise of that year, a creditable one for the Baltic fleet. The squadron is fighting with the blue breaking through from the west, the guns of forts and battleships rumbling, manoeuvring on the beach near the Tolbukin lighthouse. Closer to the southern shore of the bay can be seen destroyers. In the west showed the smoke of ships blue. Battleships, probably, see the enemy long ago. Their sighting and rangefinders for dozens of meters rise above the water surface. Not like us. But the enemy detects small boats also at a short distance. The destroyers begin to put up smoke screens. This is the signal to attack the torpedo boats, with the support of destroyers rushing towards the blue. Rapid rapprochement, exit to the point of salvo. A rocket flies into the air, indicating a torpedo strike, and we lie down on the curse of departure. Now, to Kronstadt. Ahead of winter, work on repair of boats, put in the hangar on keel blocks, classes with the crew, commander's training, and so until spring. And as soon as the sun warms up, the bay is cleared of ice again. Combat training. This is how the Baltic sailors prepared for future battles year after year on a small space in the eastern part of the Gulf of Finland. The scope of the exercises was modest for the present times, both in terms of the forces that took part in them and the water area covered. But the Red Banner Baltic Fleet was mastering new ships, practicing the interaction of heterogeneous forces, honing combat skills. Here were trained a cadre of excellent sailor warriors, developed tactical techniques that successfully withstood the harsh test during the Great Patriotic War.